Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Oh, wow. I'm sure you can see me just fine. So thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. My name is Brian Kephart. I'm the emergency manager for the city of Rancho Mirage, and I also serve as the staff liaison to the Community Emergency Preparedness Commission. So I want to thank all of you for taking a little bit of time out of your evening to come and learn a little bit about emergency preparedness. This is kind of an abstract subject, a little bit different. So we hope we are going to keep you entertained. I know for a fact that we will. So a few housekeeping items before we get started. Go ahead and if you could just double check your cell phones, make sure that they're silenced and muted. If you need to use the restrooms, if you haven't been to our facility before, they are straight out through the back, down the hallway, out the double doors. And I wouldn't be a good emergency manager if we didn't talk about safety a little bit. If we do have an evacuation, there's several doors to your right with marked exits. In the event of a power outage, all of the green exit signs should be on. And I'm going to go work for Delta Airlines after all this. And then if we do have any sort of cardiac emergency, we do have an AED in the rear left of the room. So I would like to begin by first thanking our event sponsors, Brandini Toffee, for providing these delicious nutless popcorn toffee, and to Simpler Life Water for providing the complimentary cans of their 100-year emergency water. We encourage you to visit the Brandini Toffee store right here in the heart of Rancho Mirage, tucked behind the Hobby Lobby at the Rancho Las Palmas Shopping Center. And if you would like more information about how to obtain your own supply of 100-year emergency water, you can speak to Mario in the back of the community room. I'm sure most of you have already had an opportunity to speak with him. I would also like to acknowledge the efforts of our volunteer board of commissioners from the Rancho Mirage Emergency Preparedness Commission, who have done all of the coordination to bring this program to you this evening, and who contribute many hours of their personal time to help encourage our residents, businesses to prepare and be prepared for natural disasters. This year, our commission consists of Commission Chair Mitch Brown, Commissioners Tony Hyams, Gary Jones, Caprice Linanen, Ron Stillman, and our commission technical advisors Mary Lou Suter and Katie Stice, who many of you know from our famous Rancho Mirage Chamber of Commerce. So thank you very much to our volunteer commissioners. We'd also like to acknowledge and thank the Rancho Mirage City Council for the continued support of emergency preparedness programs such as this. Without their continued support, we wouldn't be able to put on these programs and for helping to finance not only this wonderful facility, but all the logistics that go on behind the scenes to help us bring us these programs to you. So, and now without further ado, I would like to introduce my clicker. Next slide. There we go. I'd like to introduce our speaker for the evening. The Coachella Valley is long overdue for the next big earthquake, and while we often focus on the physical aspects of emergency preparedness, we often overlook the mental and psychological preparedness needed to help get us through the extended recovery process. Fortunately, we have for you this evening an expert who's going to share with us his personal insights and firsthand experiences recovering from disasters. He will help to explain how you can prepare yourself both mentally and physically for the post-disaster recovery process. He is a consultant for Listos, California, and Chief Facilitation Officer for Brain Friendly Dynamics. Please welcome to the stage, Scott Winter.
You coming down? Boy, next. Thanks, brother. Can you hear me okay? Awesome. Well, thank you all for having me. Thanks, Brian, for the introduction. So I'm going to take you through a bit of a mind walk and a journey. As Brian said, this is a bit abstract because a lot of times most of us are coming to these programs to learn about how to prepare. And what I'm finding is that a lot of times that's one part of the picture. And as I go through today and I go through the presentation, what I want to kind of tap into is really the opportunity that is being missed in all the communities around this country in terms of getting prepared for some disasters in different ways. But I want to share with you some quotes. Some of this, it comes from a book from Jane McGonigal called Imaginable. And in that book, she kind of describes just how many things are happening in our world today that just maybe 25 years ago we considered unimaginable. And that kind of puts us in some traps. And so I want to share this quote from her, which says almost every surprising event that ever occurred was unimaginable shortly before it happened. How many of you can think of an event that you thought was totally impossible that once it happened is like, what's one do you have in your mind? Think of something.
Losing my home to fire in Malibu.
Boom. Yeah. Couldn't even imagine. It was a thought, but was it really deeply understood, right? I saw someone else's hand back there somewhere.
JFK.
Yeah, exactly. I thought my grandmother, when she talked about like seeing a man on the moon, just things like that. We just never really think about. And so much of the work that I do is getting people to think. A lot of the work that I do is really about helping communities, individuals, teams increase capacity. Because to me, it's a matter of how do we deal with stress? And my definition of stress is when demand exceeds capacity. How many experience that dynamic in your own life? How many roles do you play in your life? And you're like, how do I do all those things? It's a demand capacity issue. So where I put my attention is really looking at demand capacity and increasing capacity in individuals. And I'm going to share a little about some of the work I do with communities around how do we do that, building that individual resilience. 2 is how do we help teams come together? So I live in Butte County, where Chico, California, where the Camp Fire occurred. And I'll be sharing a little bit about that in just a moment. But one of the things that we have done is we have a number of different community collaboratives because we have a ton of resources. But if we don't engage them, we're not going to be ready for the next thing. And so I'll be sharing a little bit about that. And then lastly, building the resiliency in communities. So I want to share some assumptions with you about why I'm here. And I think the first one is disasters are unpredictable, but our responses don't have to be. One of the things that was interesting during the campfire, because one of the things I did for the campfire is all the post-trauma recovery work with some of the victims of that campfire. And there's a lot of them. And one gentleman talked about the only thing he took from his house as the fire was encroaching on his home was his wife's 5 cocktail dresses. That's all he took. And he's like, and his wife thought he was an idiot, and he thought he was an idiot, and his dogs died, and everything. And it was this. And I just asked him. I said, "What did they mean to you?" He goes, "Those were the happiest moments in my life." And then he told his wife that because I said, "Go tell your wife that," and she goes, "She still loves me." It's like, good, all right, we want to do that. But I think a lot of times we think we know, and I don't think we're doing a good enough job. We can give you all the tools, all the techniques, but if you don't have the practice, if you're not practicing the stuff consistently, having conversations with your neighbors consistently in terms of what are we going to do if this happens, then we're going to be ill-prepared. 2, panic and paralysis are as dangerous as disaster itself. And I think a lot of times you can see the fight, flight, or freeze. How many of you have heard of that terminology? We've all heard it, right? So there are times where people will just freeze. You see during the campfire, we had people who literally perished in their cars, probably because they froze. They didn't know what to do. Or the speed of the fire came really quickly. But there are all kinds of examples where people will just freeze up and other people are scrambling because of the way we're wired biologically. And I think it's important that you understand that you're a biological creature, you're social, emotional, and the last thing you are is rational. So we got to be able to build in some new practices on how we do this. Preparation goes beyond supplies. It's about mindset. And this is where I spend a lot of my work. Recovery is a long ride. So it's been since 2018 during the campfire, and the town of Paradise is still doing the long-term recovery. And I'll explain a little about what we're doing up there still. Community resilience starts with individual mindset. How many of you realize that in this room, there are probably people that might come to your aid? Because here's the reality. Less than 5% of those people rescued in a disaster are rescued from people from an EMS system. It comes from your neighbors, it comes from your churches, it comes from the community, and I think we're not doing a good enough job getting communities connected, and especially as it seems more divisive, we have to come together to guess, because it doesn't care who you voted for. A fire is going to take you out. So we have to be better about this stuff. Lastly, resilience is trainable. So let me start with this date here. So November 8, 2018 was the day of the campfire. I was working in Oroville at that time, which could see this huge cloud. In fact, I was driving to the town of Oroville from Chico, where I live, as I noticed this huge cloud just immerse. And I'm thinking, gosh, hope they get that out soon. And as the day progressed, I was at Oroville. By 11 a.m., TV was on. Town of Paradise was just getting taken out. The school was on fire. The hospital was being taken down. There's just all kinds of, and just sitting in that space, I had flight nurses in the class that I was teaching. We had all kinds of medical people, and they were just leaving. And we just sat and prayed, because that's all we really could do. And it was so insane because in that moment, none of us, we'd imagined it because I'd worked with the Fire Safe Council back, maybe 20 years before the campfire, where we literally said we have to build a road past Magalia, because if we don't, that can be, because we were waiting for the fire. But we just, again, it was kind of like that. We know it's logically, but we just didn't really have our heads wrapped around it. But if we had not built that road, we would have seen a lot more than the 85 people who perished. And again, it's that forward thinking that we need to bring. But here are some of the results of the casualties of the campfire. 85 fatalities, and I think it would have been a whole lot more. We had over 18,000 structures destroyed, displaced over 50,000 people, estimated $16.5 billion, where LA fire just recently, $250 to $275 billion just in one. And the area burned significant. And the fire lasted for about 22 days in the month of November. So again, we're dealing with some dynamics. Now, you also have to understand that my house, I lived in Chico, my house closed escrow the day before the campfire. And fortunately, I lived in Chico, but it was amazing how many people came to my house and says, how much we'll give you double. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this was the desperation. And we just sold our house. And we were going to have a yard sale that weekend. And I'm sitting in the house, because on November 9th, the smoke was so thick that I had ice on my windshield. And it was 72 degrees just 25 miles north outside of the smoke range. That's how thick the smoke was. I was devastated. I mean, I sometimes will get emotional thinking about it, because it was in that moment that I felt completely helpless. And one of the number one causes of stress in our nervous system is feeling helpless. So you can have all the tools, but if you're not understanding how to apply them when you're under stress, you can go soft really quick. You can freeze. So we have to practice. But I realized at that moment that I had a house full of stuff, because one thing I don't like are yard sales. And so one of the things that I did is I realized that in that moment of feeling helpless and feeling overwhelmed and people calling and checking in on me, and we had people coming into our house who had lost their homes and we were trying to shelter them, I had a house full of stuff. I ended up giving just about everything, with permission from my wife, of course, but I got rid of just about everything. We gave away cars, we gave away our furniture, because we were downsizing. We didn't need a big place. And it was really insane. But it was in that moment, too, as I was going to all these makeshift shelters that showed up for me, was just the beauty that was coming out of that experience. And the beauty was that I saw something. And part of it was what I discovered in myself, was that in that feeling of being helpless, going out and being helpful was really the anecdote. It was really that thing of help me feel like I have a say, I can contribute. And as a result, I became a search and rescue volunteer, because I never want to feel that way again. And so one of the things that showed up, though, in that day was a real miracle, because I pulled up to this makeshift shelter, and there were people pulling up with cars that had different stickers that supported different causes or different politicians, and they were coming together, and they were rallying together, and they were supporting each other. And what I witnessed in that moment was really how humanity showed up. And it's interesting to me, because I always find it interesting. Why is it that humanity shows up after disaster? And really what my research has been since then, and the work that I've been doing, is kind of turning it around and really asking ourselves the question is, how can we tap into humanity as a community resiliency strategy before a disaster? Having humanity as a mindset, because it's not just about the mindset. I think it's also about our heart set. That where's the compassion? Because that's something we're built in. If you see someone in need, typically, how many people have come to your aid as a result of the disaster? Maybe even strangers, for example, right? People have this innate capacity as human beings to connect socially and emotionally. And we need to prepare ourselves, because one of the best ways to deal with anxiety, if I found, is going out and be helpful. That moment of feeling completely helpless, going out and giving stuff away, feeling helpful, and then now investing myself in my time and my volunteer time to go and help out has been significant for me. So I want to kind of explore what those things are. What does it need to kind of tap into that before it occurs? Because how many of you guys realize that the big one is coming? I mean, you're all talking about it, right? We know it's coming. And why aren't we doing more about it to connect? And I tell you, your community, just this event alone, speaks volumes to the work that the investments being made in your role, and the work that Mitch is doing to kind of bring people together. But how many resources can we start to tap into? How many things could we bring to our things now? Because in Butte County, we have a resiliency collaborative. We have a food systems collaborative. We have a mental health collaborative. We have a social connection collaborative, because we realize with that fabric that we're building, we're going to be better the next time something bad happens, because it's built. Now, do we have work to do still? Absolutely, because we have different towns. But we're looking at it as a regional, county-wide approach. We have to come together. And it's not about sides. It's about a direction. So what have I discovered? So what is the humanity mindset checklist? And there's a handout there for you. So one is fostering a shared sense of responsibility, strengthen social bonds and networks. And I'm going to break these down. We're going to do a couple activities here. So just so you know, we're going to go live to the improv here in just a minute. So hang with me. We're going to be able to rewire how we think about preparedness. Because I think a lot of times when we think about preparedness, we're just like, yeah, I'm prepared. I got my go bag. I got my 72 hours. I can guarantee you right now, if you look at the trends, I think what I hear from Mitch and the work that you're doing here around preparedness is you're looking at 14 days kind of preparedness kind of stuff. And with all the risk to FEMA now, it might be 45 days. It might be 4 years. So you have to really start to think about what is the right, and I don't mean that from the election, just get over that one, okay? But the idea is we have to think we need to create the social support systems now for those long-term things, because even FEMA is not enough, right? And so we have to be a lot more self-reliant, and the resources exist. We have enough food in this world to feed every person on this planet. The issue is not lack of resources, it's bad planning and poor management. So what are we doing as bystanders and citizens to bring people together? As a partner, as a collaborator. So bringing that to the table. Train for mental resilience is where I spend a lot of my time. Not just physical readiness, it's mental readiness. How many of you have a to-do list? Right? And how many of you would say that sometimes your to-do list influences how you're being? Like people say, I'm crazy busy, which drives me crazy when they say that, because they're just setting themselves up for anxiety. So I have a new thing. I have a to-be list. I don't have a to-do, I have a to-be list. I have a lot to do. But how do I need to be as I tackle this thing? And where I learned that was as a search and rescue volunteer. If we come to a scene and it's an over-the-edge scene, I need to be calm and I need to be alert. That's where I need to be, so I can do those things. Because if I'm not, then I'm at risk, my team's at risk, the victim's at risk, right? So I need to be in a state that's going to allow me to show up. And I'm going to give you some tools around that. In fact, in the handout that you have is really a deeper dive into all of that. We're not going to get so much into those traits. That's for you to take home and play with. Create spaces and systems to encourage cooperation. I'll give you some examples of that. And then lastly, shifting the mindsets for individualism to collective resilience. And again, I really kind of come back to this mindset, because when I work on resiliency for individuals, one of the things I love to ask them is I spend the first few minutes just talking about mindset, right? Did you know, well, how many of you, I know that some of you probably, I talked to some people in the audience that are retired, which is fair, but when you were working, right, did you have a stressful job, right? And if people were in a stressful job and they think that's stressful, it increases your mortality by like 40%, like just your relationship with stress, right? So mindset matters in so many ways. And so how do we develop that resilient mindset along the way? So let's take a few of these. So I'm gonna play a couple games here. We're gonna start with this first one. And I'm gonna share some slides, and I'm hoping you can read it, and I apologize if you don't. But I'm gonna talk about why this works. So first of all, when you have a shared challenge, it unites people, as we've seen over and over again. What comes after, and I always say there's an element of beauty to every disaster, and that's when that humanity. But again, we have to reverse that and say, how do we do it before? And this idea of collective efficacy is that when people feel responsible for one another, and that's what happens. During the campfire, one of the things that really occurred is that we came to each other's aid. There was no question that I was not going to be there for someone who needed me. And are there people that take advantage of that? Yes. But can we create systems to prevent that? Yes. We have to be better as a community to think, what do we need when those things happen? So this is why it works. There's research that suggests, and you can ask for me, give you all the resources, but this is why it works. But that shared sense of responsibility, where do we want to go? What kind of community do we want to be like? What does readiness look like for this community? Where do we want to go together? So that we are ready mentally, not just physically. And we're going to do some exercises in just a moment. So how you do it? You create, you do these kinds of initiatives, right? So you're already on the right track here. But reframe preparedness as an act of care. I think a lot of times there's an element of fear. How many say that there's an element of fear when you think about disaster preparedness? Or it may never happen, right? I got my go bag, or maybe I don't have a go bag. And it's really one of those things is it's looking at it more from a place of caring and compassion rather than angst and anxiety. And so here's an example. In the Netherlands, for example, were having a lot of floods, seasonal floods. And so what they did is they brought the community together to redesign the whole prevention strategy, right? So what are we doing to come together to say, okay, if we have a big one, right, where do we go? Does everyone know the map? Do you know how you're going to get, how many people who in this community maybe not be as able-bodied and they need assistance? Who do they have to get them to where they need to go? Have we looked out for those people? What are some of the things that we're doing to kind of start to plan as a community and then start to practice community? And the fortunate thing is you have a city representative whose role is to help you do that. I'm hoping I'm not selling you too much on that one because you're going to be a busy, busy guy, right? Yeah, so that's a plug. You can pay me later. All right, so let's do an experiment. I want you to think of different roles that exist in your community, different roles that people play. Just give me a role that someone plays. You know, could be like, let's say, for example, give me one. I'm going to see where your thinking is right now. Give me a role. What's that? An HOA president, okay. What's another one? Everyone's like, oh, God, one of them. Okay, what else? A committed member? Okay. A committee member, okay. What else? What other member? Think about your community. Like, anyone go grocery shopping? Or do you have someone shop for you guys? I'm not sure. What's that? Walmart Prime. You guys are just onlining it now, so. Okay, so the Uber drivers. Okay, gosh, you guys are. I don't know how this is going to work without this. Does anyone have a role here that actually makes the world run? Right? What's a communicator? Thank you. Oh my gosh. Because you guys feel a little stuck, let me just play with a little bit more. So here's a grocery store owner, okay, a truck driver or a volunteer with a truck, a medic, a senior center operator, let's say a school teacher, an accountant, an engineer, others, right? So let's just say I have a store and I have food, and the big one occurs, and I don't have people deliver it, but I have a truck driver over here, right? And all of a sudden we have to connect, but we need to know, and so we have the truck driver, and now that truck driver needs to find maybe a communicator. So can you catch? All right, so catch it. Good thing it's not hard. Very good, nice, very good, okay. So now you're the communicator. What would you need to be communicating, knowing that I have food, he has a vehicle, you're going to communicate, and who are you going to communicate to? Okay, so how are you going to do that? Maybe you have a nonprofit or maybe a foundation. Who's a foundation director? Oh, you are, okay. So he's going to be right here, up in the front here, okay. So toss it. Boom, okay. So you're the nonprofit director. She's communicating the fact that we have these resources. You're the nonprofit director. What do you need to be doing? Getting volunteers. So you need to get some volunteers. And so who's our volunteer coordinator? So you're like, I don't want to catch this stupid thing. Where is it going? All right. You're the volunteer coordinator? I am the volunteer. Okay, well then you're lucky. You're going to catch it. So don't screw it up. All right? Boom. That's all about. Yeah, it's like, this is kind of that can thing. So now you're the volunteer coordinator, right? What do you need? Volunteers. So you need the volunteers. Okay, you got the volunteers. What do you need to gather them? Is there a place that you need for them to gather? Yeah. Where's the place? The tennis court. So who's the guy that who's the man or woman who unlocks the tennis court so everyone can go there? Maybe they're already, or the pickleball courts. I don't know, but okay, I know, and it's so disturbing. Okay, so what do you have for? So you need the person to open the gate for the court. Would you mind being the gatekeeper for the courts? Oh boy. Okay, don't worry about it because you're going to hit him in the head first, so that's fine. So go ahead and throw it this way. Throw it this way. Okay, right? Boom. Nice. Oh my gosh, you're good. Okay, now let's pull tight for just a minute. Let's just pull tight. Just pull tight. Everyone just pull. I'm going to pull through. Let it come through. Pull it tight. Oh, don't let it go. That's going to be in just a moment. I will say to let it go. Okay, so just know that now it's taut and we're connected. Of course, there's multiple other roles that we need to be dealing with. But one of the things that I'm finding in a lot of communities is that a lot of times we don't have this kind of clarity, right? And what would happen if you were to let go of yours? Just let go of yours, okay? How often do we have someone to back up that role, for example, or your role? What happens if something happens to you, and guess what? Who's going to call the volunteers? I have an alternate. Nice. Okay, and they got taken out. What happens? Oh my gosh. Okay, man, you're awesome. So you just hold on to that. And then, but again, you start to notice when something gets dropped, what happens? And this is what happened in Butte County. We've had a dam that almost exploded, right? Which turned people into zombies. It was crazy. People pulling people out of cars. It was insane. Then we had the campfire. then we had the Bear Fire, then we had a number, and just recently we had the Park Fire. And even though we think we have all these different systems working together, some people dropped it, right? And now, guess what? We're not as prepared. In fact, Brian, you were sharing how one of the challenges in this world is that there's always so much turnover. But we got to keep those threads going in our community. And do we even know what those threads look like when it comes to the next disaster? Do we have a plan for what that big one, and what is going to happen when certain buildings, and have scenarios where we talk about what's going to happen? We have to start planning that way. So thank you for playing. Great hands, great hands, great hands. So let's give them a hand. Thank you for that. So it's kind of obvious, but again, I like to state the obvious because sometimes, and it's common sense, but I don't think we're commonly practicing that as an ethos in our communities. Like, we're really being deliberate about what are those networks that we need to be establishing. What are those networks we need to be established? Because similar to the webbing process, we need to strengthen our social bonds and our networks. But again, it just seems like we're so divided at times that we need to figure how to reconnect socially with each other. So why does it work when we have strong social bonds? So we know that pre-existing ties speeds recovery, that when you have a good strong community, it just speeds up the response and recovery process. It just does. And again, one of the things that we were with our feet tied to the ground during campfire, we didn't know, and we just made stuff up. We made up so many things because we didn't have an infrastructure. And ironically, I was teaching a class as the campfire broke called Radical Collaboration. Like, how are we going to collaborate in radically new ways so that we can actually show up when it's needed most? And the gentleman who was in my class then became the campfire recovery director for 5 years. And one of the biggest challenges was leaders in different organizations not wanting to work together. Because what happens when a disaster occurs, at least back then, money started coming in, right? And then people were playing me, versus we. And it really started becoming very political and very stupid. So we broke down and we said we need to start coming together and bringing people together, and we created new networks. We're now working together in different ways. And there's a lot of science around what happens when you build that trust. In Butte County, you have, in healthcare or in mental health, we had the circles of care. And one of the biggest issues working with like law enforcement and mental health people, the issue that we were always working with was the trust between law enforcement and mental health and healthcare. So we had to work on shoring up those lines before we could really start shoring up the process and systems along the way. So how do you do it? Encourage regular community gatherings like this. But let's start being creative with how we do it. So it's not just a sit still, in still. No, we're going to practice. I'm really of the belief that whatever you do consistently, you will get better at. Anyone agree with that assertion? Right? I'm really good at binge watching TV and eating Doritos. I mean, I'm amazing at it, right? Especially during COVID. I was excellent at that, right? But the reality is that we have to start changing the way we think about how we're getting prepared. And again, if we're not practicing, we're going to wonder why we weren't prepared as effective as we could be. So let's start practicing together. Developing these mutual aid networks. And one of the things that's so interesting is you have anybody a member of VOAD here? Any VOAD members? Any CERT members? VOAD? You have VOAD and CERT? Okay. And I just wonder, how often do we get VOAD and CERT and search and rescue and all the working together, having convenings together to talk about what we're going to do at the next scenario? And we're not. We should be, but we're not because, well, that's what we do. And they have these sides and these lines and these divisions. It's not necessary. We need to be coming together, and that's your job. All right? So that's part of that dynamic, okay? Practice pre-disaster mobilization. Let's do it. Okay, we just had an earthquake. What are we going to do? We got to go to the tennis courts, okay? And how long is it going to take? Now, what we can't predict is what roads are going to be closed, right? But we can build it into the sim. We can build it into the experience. And how are we going to get these people who are not as able-bodied but can actually maybe distribute food, whatever. But are we practicing this stuff? Anybody? Because, again, whatever we do, we're going to get better at versus making up as we go. How much time could be saved? How many lives could be saved if we had more preparation? But it's more about the mindset of how we want to prepare. So here's in Japan, this notion of Basai in Japan, it means disaster prevention, mitigation, and management. It refers to a holistic approach to disaster risk reduction that includes preparedness, response, recovery, and reconstruction. How many of you would say that our communities have a really good plan and system for all four factors? So then, who are we going to be pissed at when it's not happening? See, I'm of the belief that there's no one to blame because we're all accountable. So what are you doing, Joe Blow Citizen? What are you doing, Josephine Blow Citizen? I mean, we have to start having a different conversation. And I'm not going to be like sky is falling, but I'm going to show you a slide in a little bit to say the trend's not working in our favor when we start looking at disasters in this country. So we have to be more proactive, and that takes a mental state to say, I can do something. Because many of us are saying, I can't. Yes?
I think we have a fairly good plan.
Good.
The problem is getting the community on board with it.
Okay.
And the HOA directors.
So,
Get involved.
yes. So bring food, do a sim, right? So you got to solve for the problem. Don't call it a problem, solve for the problem. Why aren't they showing up? Why aren't they interested, right? Oh, just, I know, just. Yes.
I'd like to add on that we have a lot of people who are part-time residents here.
Yeah.
Come to vacation and do not want to be bothered. They just want to relax.
And then that 9.7 earthquake shows up on July 2nd, or wait, no, it'd be like maybe February 2nd. Yeah, snowbirds. Anyway, but the idea is like you have to be prepared. Like you're coming in and you're making a commitment because here's the reality. Even during the campfire, even during certain things, people make certain choices that put other people at risk. Right? So we have an obligation to each other, and that's the mindset. Right? So how do we invite people into our communities and say, we're glad you're here and we need you? Yeah? We're going to keep trying. And I'm going to give you some insights around it in just a moment. So don't give up. Because how many of you have that little voice in your head right now? Right? Some of you guys, what little voice? That little voice. Right? Some of you guys have many voices. Totally different program. But the idea is that we have to work through some of that because mindset matters. There's something called persuasion science. Right? And there's a lot of research around how it works, and I'll give you some insights how to do that, but it's down here in embedded. Let me get through more slides here. So the other part is how to rewire how we think about preparedness, which I think that's part of you saying. Like people come down here just to relax, right? So we have to get them to think they're coming here for that relaxation, but if it hits the fan, it's not going to be relaxing, right? Just like people say when you prepare for your death, you live more fully. If you're really prepared, you're going to be calm and alert when it matters most. Because if you come here and you're not prepared, then we got some work to do, right? So we want to rewire how we're doing this. So I have a little exercise here for you. So what I want you to do is, let me just start with this one first. Before I get here, I want you to think about words that come to mind when you hear me say the word disaster preparedness. What comes to mind when you hear the word disaster preparedness? Negative, okay? Getting supplies, negative. Water. Why negative? What negative words do you associate with it? What's that? Go-to bag, okay. Safety. Death, injury, carnage, right? Zombies, right? But notice the mindset you have just around the disaster preparedness. So are we sending maybe we need to rethink differently about it. What happens if we looked at preparedness as an act of care, an act of community, an act of strength or empowerment? And that you had a role, because there's a game that's being played out here at times, right? If I were to just have you do a quick experiment with me, for someone who's next to you, right? You can be my partner, okay? So you're going to just choose a partner, A and B. So choose someone A and B right now. Just say who's going to be A, and you can be ABC, okay? You guys really just getting each other's chili here. So let's say I'm person A, and you're person B, right? And what I'm going to say to you in just a moment, I'm going to say, when I say go, person A, you're going to say to person B, you go first. And then person B, you're going to say to person A, you go first. And then I'm going to say, no, you go first. No, you said, no, you go first. And we're going to keep going until we're kind of getting loud, okay? Now, there are two rules. No touching, no spitting, okay? I just want to make sure that's clear. So person A, everyone get your finger ready. Get your finger ready. Point at person B and go, you go first. You go first. Keep going fast. Back. You go first. You go first. You go first. You go first. Okay, go ahead. Calm down now. All right. Sometimes you do this and people start yelling. And you can see who has anger management issues over here. Okay, so pause. Here's the dynamic. There's a game that we play, and it's called You Go First, right? Think about it. What's your name, sir? Bobby? Okay, Bobby. I want you to stand up. Could you stand up for me a moment? I want you to walk by me as you would a stranger on the street, okay? Here we go. We just played You Go First. Did you see it? Let's do it again. Slow motion this time. Ready? Right there. I just played You Go First. You see it? I'm not going to say hi to you until you say hi to me. You go first. I'm not going to trust you until you trust me. You go first. I'm not going to put myself out there until I know it's safe. I'm not going to, so we play this game called You Go First all day long. And to me, it's about how do we create a go first culture. I shared this with a healthcare system a number of years ago, and they're on the bottom 5% of HCAP scores, which are patient satisfaction scores. And we created a whole campaign of just going first. If I see something, I'm going to go first, and I'm going to work on fixing it, bring in the right people around the table. Because people need to know that they have a responsibility to make things better. Anybody complain out there? All complainers, right? So I really try to get people to understand, it's like, well, what part of the role are you playing? If you want to see complainers stop complaining, put them in charge. So we have a job to do. So we have to rewire how we think about preparedness. Again, what would happen if we approached it as a contract, right? It was even a consideration back in the day when my kids were in school that as parents, we had to give so many hours of community service to our kids' school. And it was a public school. But we had to give. And it was like really foreign. It's like, what do you mean? I just want them out of the house. But it shifted my mindset because we had to do it with our kids. And it changed the game and that community and that culture and what we learned together. And it was amazing because they changed the way we thought about service. Parent, too, social proof effect, right? This is where Cialdini's work is so interesting. Robert Cialdini's got a lot of research around just persuasion science. And, he does so much really cool stuff around getting people to understand what it takes to build community. And if you want to create a movement, because I really think what we need to do is build a movement, not a camp, it's a movement. Because, again, we have to be ready. And I don't mean we have to, I'm prepared, and you've heard of, like, the prepper term, and there's nothing against preppers. But there's different continuums of preparedness. But there's also different continuums of what it means to be in a community. And so this is more about that community preparedness as a whole. But what Cialdini talks about is, like, if let's say you had a campaign, I'm ready, just an I'm ready campaign. And all of a sudden you say, hey, do you have your go bag? And do you have these other things that are going to be really essential for our community when things happen? And you say, would you mind putting the sticker on your window so that people can see it? And all of a sudden you start seeing a social contagion start to take place. Now, using the word contagion soon after COVID is not a good thing, but the reality is it can happen because the brain is social. And we underestimate the power of social in everything that we do. We take sides, we take labels, and we don't understand that if we want to build about communities, like we're coming together around what it means to be prepared. And what am I going to do to be of service to my neighbors? So my neighbor and I, we're complete opposites, but we're really good friends because we look out for each other. And he's like, hey, did you get that on camera, that guy that egged my truck? It's like, well, if you took that sticker off, you probably wouldn't get egged. I'm not taking that sticker off. Okay, all right. So how to do it, right? So you normalize preparedness. Just normalize it. Integrate an everyday community. In some communities, I'm going to go down to the other piece here. So in some communities, they're doing resiliency fairs. In some cultures, they build resiliency as a practice into their events. They just build it in. They just do it. It's just a part of how they live. And I'll get to a slide in a moment that'll explain that, right? So we have to rewire how we're doing this in certain ways, right? It says here, activities, family, friends. So in the, we know that food brings people together, music, culture. A lot of the communities during last year's OES event for disaster preparedness, or Listos, they were asking, like, what would be something you would need in a fair bag? Like, if you wanted to host something in your neighborhood, what would you want? And some communities are saying, we're going to do go bag with our kids. We're going to do all kinds of stuff. And so it's kind of like that Friday night, what's that, Saturday, that night out event? So the National Night Out, they're also doing a lot of that now with National Night Out, right? All right, so this next one is about training mental resilience, right? Not just physical piece. And what I like about this work, this is where I spend most of my time working with organizations and people, because how many of you have ever heard the term a rising tide raises all boats, right? And the reason why this is important is because of all the collaboratories we have in Butte County, or collaborators we have in Butte County, there are people that come into those community, these team meetings, but they're really jacked up emotionally, right? They've been agitated, they're really reactive, they're stressed out in a lot of ways. So what we've been really focusing on is how do we get people to settle in before we start having the meetings. Because how many of you have ever been in a meeting and one person takes it way off base? And so we need to kind of teach people how to manage themselves along the way. So I spend a lot of time in this space because we realize that we have a lot to do. So the mental resilience can be trained, and this is where we're doing it. So for example, in Paradise, the town of Paradise, I'm now working with their town leadership, town manager, and a bunch of their staff and we've ordered everyone what are called Aura Rings. So this is biofeedback. So we're using biofeedback for them, and we're teaching them how to bounce back from stress. And one of the things that we're teaching them is we're giving them a framework to say, what are some of the rituals that you build into your life around good health and well-being, right? And a lot of people, we don't. Let me see if anyone can relate to this. For those of you who still may have jobs, I always think about this as if this is high energy, this is low energy, this is positive energy, and this is negative energy, right? This is considered high performance. This is where I want to be operating as a person in a disaster. I want to be in a high performance state, right? But a lot of times what happens is that if you're in a job where you have to perform well, and how many of you sometimes find yourself in a job where you have to be high energy, but it's kind of negative, and you're just kind of pounding through and you're struggling, right? You just kind of struggle. Everyone experience that? Just kind of keep going, grinding, got to get to 5 o'clock, get to 7 o'clock, I can't put down, I got to keep working, right? Define done, for one, just define done. But what happens is that most people are just starting their day here, right? And now all of a sudden they move down to here. So this is kind of the survival quadrant. And then they move into burnout and allostatic load and all kinds of stuff. And so I'm seeing a lot of people living in this space right now. And so what we're trying to do is say, okay, as a group of community members working together and leaders trying to impact, because they're really committed. They have so much to do. There's such a burden. There's so much compassion fatigue in Butte County because we're trying to rebuild after the fire, right? So what we're trying to teach them is say, well, let's go down here. Let's spend our time throughout the day to go down to renewal. Because in sports, for example, it's all about recovery. But what are you doing throughout the day to kind of recover? And so what I really encourage people is to kind of play the 1% rule. Does anyone know how much 1% of your day is in terms of minutes? It's 14, right? What would happen if you did 14 minutes of just a mindfulness practice, intentional mindfulness practice before you started something? Or better yet, just go to 0.25, which is 3.5 minutes. Just a 2-minute breath practice. Deep breath practice can restate your nervous system, get you back in the game. And so it's really amazing how we could do a lot more by just helping people manage their state. But how often do we develop these practices? But why it works? Because we know that it's essential for giving that energy the reborn. But we want to kind of help people understand how their nervous system works and how their brains work. Because if you're not in control of it, something else is. We want to put people back in the driver's seat of themselves. So how do you do it? Develop mental readiness. Teach adaptive thinking, stress management. We're going to do a couple little exercises here in just a moment. But how often do you actually are very effective in your gatherings to teach these practices intentionally? Promote resiliency practices. Frame resilience as a skill. One of the things I'm finding in doing all this resiliency work, that really the word resiliency is a trigger word for people. In fact, the Town of Paradise leadership team, they didn't like resilience. They wanted to focus on well-being. Because like Paradise Rebuild, Paradise Strong, Resilient Paradise, and people just that in of itself is creating trauma for them, right? So we're framing it in a different way. So reframing it matters. So this is an example in New Zealand. They have the Stay Well, Stay Connected campaign, right? Iwaki Ika Noa, which is we're all in this together. So they created this kind of dynamic. But one of the things that we want to do is we want to give people this sense of where are they in this thing. So one of the things we're doing in Paradise, we have a resiliency assessment, and we try to get them to understand that wherever you are, right? So they're down, like they're kind of, this is not the Paradise team. This is just a sample. But this is an example of what we're looking at. And so when people overload, they disengage, they avoid, flight, defend, fight, collapse, play dead. And so one of the things that they're doing really well in the workspace, but they're really burning out because they're avoiding the difficult challenges that they have in their lives, right? So we're saying if you know where you are on the continuum, then you should have the tools to know how to get out of it. So again, if you know where you are, you should be able to know what to do. And I would think that's the same thing with any sort of preparedness work that we're doing. So what we design is what are called resiliency circuits. So you can do some different practices in any sort of gathering, at your meetings, at your events, kind of engage their brains, not just their bodies, engage them, get them to feel. So one of the ways is adaptive thinking. So let's do a little exercise here. So here is a challenge. Your neighborhood has experienced severe flooding and you're unable to drive to safety, okay? Your task is I want you to really think about, identify at least 3 opportunities or solutions. So if you have this series challenge, what are 3 things you could do to keep yourself in the game? How would you reframe this? What's that? Well, okay, walk where? Okay, walk to higher. Maybe walk to someone to check on them, for example, right? Think about what would you do in these situations. Again, this is an example of some scenario-based stuff, but simple things, but reframe it. So, for example, we have to learn. Example, instead of panicking about being stuck, focus on finding local resources, checking in on neighbors, using social media requests for help, any number of things. But if you're not thinking about this stuff, I'll give you an example of how humiliating it can feel when you don't think about these things. When the iPhone first came out with the phone, I remember I was at Home Depot, and I was still the type of guy that I would be writing the UPC code symbols to make the order. And you guys remember the UPC symbols and stuff? That used to be the thing. And so I said to my son, I said, Sterling, can you give me a pen and a paper so I can write this note down? And he comes up to me, and he pulls out his phone, and he's all, click, click. And I'm all, get in the car. But again, I was challenged. I didn't have a pen and a paper, but he had different tools. He thought about it differently. I would say our whole existence, if we would not survive if we didn't have teenagers because they teach us how stupid we are. Anyway, so we want to think about how you reframe. And again, psychology uses reframing as a strategy. So reframe the game, name it to tame it, that kind of stuff. But you want to kind of flip the frame. So instead of seeing it this way, just like, how would you see it another way? How could you see it another way? How could you see it another way? I do a thing called the implications wheel, where we say, what are all the implications if this thing were to occur? And you have to come up with positive and negative things, right? Because our brains typically go, if this, then this. But we got to say, well, if this, then this, and what else? And what else? And what else? So we can kind of expand our thinking in certain ways. And it's amazing when you kind of open people's minds up to that. So that's an adaptive thinking exercise. Another exercise is stress management. This is something that I'm not going to necessarily practice because you probably do this all the time, especially when you have your young grandkids around or kids. Who has grandkids or kids? You probably have done this. Great grandkids. Holy cow. Okay, so you're probably really good at this. Right? So the challenge is, this is where you could do it, though, is let's say you have, my mom's a quilter, right? And so, one of the things that I like to do with my mom is when she's got her quilting club there, I start becoming really a distraction. And man, they are so good at tuning me out. But that's a great skill, right? Loud noises, maybe farts, things like that. But who knows? I'm going to shock them. I want to get their attention, but they just ignore me so well. But you can play games like this where you're getting people focusing on something, and then you start making distractions to see if they can stay focused. You can train the brain to do this. So participants are supposed to complete their task while managing distractions. So you can say you have 5 minutes to complete this, and they have some distractions. Explore, and then you can talk about how stress impairs cognitive function, and then how do you get people back in the game. So again, these are just fun little exercises that we do, and with people that I work with at times, and that's why they asked me to leave town for a day. So number 3 is premortem thinking. Now this is the one that I think is where I think as humans, we do not understand how our brains work. You see, our brains are prediction machines, right? And emotions are merely guesses for how we need to show up in certain situations. The problem with our brains is that when something bad happens, we generally pull from our past experience into new situations. So if we've never experienced something, we're going to pull from our past that may not be of service to us in this situation. So we have to start giving ourselves the ability to think past what it would be. Another way, I'll give you another tool to think about, but this idea of premortem thinking, and for those of you who've done any sort of tech work, you probably have heard of premortems before instead of a postmortem. But think about a challenge. Your home loses power for a week during a heat wave. That would be bad. Task, identify what could go wrong and how would you prepare for it. So you have to think about all the things, we call it fear setting, for example, right? This idea of putting all the things that could go wrong out on the table and say, well, what can I do if that were to occur? You have to give your brain that ability. There's like in goal setting, there's a methodology called WHOOP, which stands for Wish, Outcome, Obstacle, Plan, right? An example of this is how many of you ever set a New Year's resolution for yourself? And then when you sobered up the next morning, you're like, oh, hell no, that's going to be hard, right? You give up because you're not giving your brain the ability to think through what's going to get in the way. So how many of you have a wish to get healthier? Maybe an outcome to lose a few pounds. But when you get done with whatever you're doing, you're too tired to do anything about it. So you're just too tired to work out because you get off work, you're too tired, right? Or you get out of bed and you're too tired. So that's the block. But you don't have any solution for that. So what's going to happen? You're going to go to what you know. I guess I'll just have my coffee, or I'm just going to go veg TV, right? So if I come home from work and I'm too tired, I put on my shoes and I go for a walk. If I'm too tired when I get out of bed, I get out of bed and I do yoga. Like, you have to give your brain the alternative to what it is that's blocking you. But I don't think, so I would be saying, what's blocking us? Really name the block. But a lot of times people say we lack money, we lack resources, we lack this, we lack that. So I would say, well, what's causing the lack? What's causing the lack of engagement? If we can solve for that, versus saying people aren't interested, well then how do we make people interested? So you have to solve the problem in a very different way. But I think a lot of times it's how do we do it under pressure? And the only way you do it is let's put that pressure thing up. Let's turn on, okay, what would happen? So we have extreme heat. Now, what's even more dangerous is if it's here extreme heat, right, and you have no electricity, right? We did a scenario a few years ago where an extreme heat episode happens in Phoenix during a 4-hour power outage. 30% of the population goes to the healthcare system. What do you do? So we have to start thinking this way, and if we're not and don't have the right players and say, do we have a plan for that? That's part of the mindset. We have to put that out there. We have to create that case. We got to do an experiment. Let's run the experiment. I'm looking at you. You got a lot on your plate now, all right? So you start to think about how pre-mortem thinking can help anticipate challenges, right? Because again, your brain's going to pull from what it knows. And in this book, Imaginable, what's interesting in the very beginning of the book, Jane McGonigal talks about she had forecasted a scenario of a pandemic like 12 years before COVID, and all these people were calling her. It's like, hey, man, I already have my toilet paper and my paper towels because we did this already 12 years ago. They were ready. They weren't stressed. They weren't panicked because they'd already experienced it. They knew what to do because they played it out in their brains as a community. A global community. So again, what could we be doing in our community to make it fun and interesting? We have some opportunities for that. Another area is the idea of creating spaces and systems that encourage cooperation, right? And so this one is, creating those cooperative habits, playing together, muscle memory for cooperation. Again, I don't want to read the slides, but you can read them. But again, how you do it is build events, build activities. I remember when I was working for the state of Washington's police training corps. So in the state of Washington, cadets from all over this municipalities from all over the state of Washington would come to this training center to be trained, and then they have to go back to their communities and give a couple of years of their time to pay back for the money that the city paid for them. And the head instructor, his name was Scott Wayne, and the guy is an amazing human being. And I was training him on some stuff, and he goes, so Scott, what do you do for a living? And I go, I'm a change agent. He goes, you're full of shit. I go, tell me more. And he goes, I don't believe I can change anybody's mind, right? And he goes, because in a hostage situation, if I'm trying to convince the perpetrator that they need to change, they're just going to become potentially more aggravated and maybe hurt themselves and hurt the hostages. But what we do try to do is we try to give them information and experiences so they can make better choices. And that's always resonated. That's been 35 years ago, right? What is the information experiences we need to be curating so that people can make better choices in the moments when it matters? Because people are going to go to what they know, and what they know may not be what is needed in those moments. So what are we doing to curate that? What information experience could we curate? And again, I think it's an important distinction because a lot of times we just think people are going to use their common sense. But how many people have seen a lot of common sense lately, right? So we have a lot of work to do there. So in Pacific Island communities, they integrate preparedness into rituals, right? They just do it. It's a part of their fabric as society. And again, as we become more dependent on communities, we're going to have to do that anymore, okay? So here are some examples. In Butte County, we host a lot of collaboratories. This was one we did just recently in Sacramento. We have the battalion chief for the fire department working with different peoples of the community. This is actually a board game that gets them to think about social currency. How much social currency exists in our community that if we could leverage it, how would it get us there? So again, there was a way that they started thinking about how to be better at collaboration. Had a wonderful conversation. 2, this is another example of creating systems. So this is in Micronesia, a lot of the island populations that are getting blasted by, water rising levels and typhoons and all kinds of disasters. But they bounce back really quickly after some serious disasters. They're still bouncing back from some of the hurricanes or typhoons they had just recently. So they actually have a radio show that goes on, and it's almost like you could say Mr. Rogers, but for disasters, right? So the idea is they're educating people. They're giving them information. Do we have the capacity to do radio shows so people can understand, like, okay, here's a scenario. What are you going to do in this situation? We could throw out a scenario for the day and get people to think about it. Give your answers. What would you do? Just think about it. And then here are some options. You've all done, I don't know if you all have done, but if you've ever done any sort of survival games, you can play that. And then lastly, is starting to think about shifting mindsets from individualism to collective resilience. And so what do I mean by that? So again, stronger communities recover faster. And I think as Butte County has gone through more disasters as of late, we're just better at it. Because again, the Camp Fire happened in July of this year. It started about a quarter mile from my house. And I was out of the country, unfortunately. But my wife was like, hey, can you call me? Because I was on the fire app. And if we have to evacuate. And I said, sure. But it was interesting because she said the next day, because I live in a neighborhood where we're surrounded by a lot of Paradise refugees. And it was amazing just how resilient they were. I mean, there was a bit of shock, a little trauma, but they were kind of like, we can get through this. And we know how to get through this because we've done it before. Now, I don't think that's what we want to be kind of practicing disasters, get better at disasters by having disasters. But that's kind of been Butte County's case study. But I tell you, we bounce back really quickly. Our search and rescue team is probably some of the best in the state because we have a lot of practice. Collective identity fosters cooperation. And this goes back to that we want to create a we-centric versus a me-centric environment. And we do it by having a common cause, which is we're not going to let the disasters define who we are as a community. So again, these are some different examples that you could be doing. And then I'm going to do a little exercise with you here in a moment here. So I want to get a sense of if you were to say, I can be better preparing, what would you do? To be prepared, I can prepare by what? What could some things you could do? So how would you prepare? If I say, I can be prepared by doing what? What are some things you could be doing to get more prepared? What could you do? What's that? Building a kit, okay? Give me another one. Educate, so learn some stuff. Learn anything specific? As a specific skill? This is it's like 5 words. Sounds like, what do you got? First aid, great, okay. What's that? Amateur radio, okay? So this is an example of I can. Now, what happens if we're to say, okay, what if we can? What can we as a community start to do? How about having a place where people can pick up kits? Like we have a place where people can go. As soon as, in fact, we don't have a welcome wagon, we have a preparedness wagon. It's like, why aren't we giving people all the things they need to be prepared when they come into town after they come back from Michigan or wherever they're coming in, right? So we can do that. We can have a place for them to go. We can give them a thing, welcome and be prepared, right? Are you ready, right? What happens? Learn. Maybe we do more of these classes in the different communities around the city. We as a community, we can actually, not only that, but maybe we can work with a foundation and we can distribute radios. Maybe we can have centers. In Butte County, we're developing a resiliency collaborative. We have a hub and then a spoke model, right? So the hub is where the resources, and then we can distribute pretty quickly. If it's dark skies, we can do this. If it's blue skies, we can do this. But we have a system now because we're coming at it from a we-centric. So we have cooling centers at churches because they have facilities. They have, so we're able to kind of play. So instead of, hey, I can offer my house, but now we can offer a community center, right? So again, we can play a different game. So just in highlighting, these are some of the steps. And the reason why these are so critical, let me share you a very scary statistic here. And the reason why I'm going to be emphatic about this, and you all might think I'm crazy, and that was okay. I've been called worse. But here are the numbers. If you look at the rate of disasters over the last several years, so in 1980 to 89, $3.3 billion disasters a year. 90 to 99, 5.7. 2000, 2009, 6.7 on average, right? In the last 5 years, you see 23. Last 3 years, 24.3. Last year alone, $27 billion disasters. And then I put the January one just recently, just so you can see that was the most expensive disaster in our history so far. Is that California? This is the LA fires. Everything that happened down in Southern California during the fire. All U.S. Yes. Yeah. So that bottom one is now just California. the most expensive disaster in our history so far. U.S. history, right? So far, right? So this is why this, to me, is so important that we can't just have the physical preparedness, we have to have the mental preparedness, which is really being prepared. And we're not going to prevent it, right? We have to be able to figure out how we're going to bounce back more quickly and more effectively. So here's a final thought. Making humanity a daily habit, practice humanity, rather than just a crisis response, is really the key to helping communities better prepare for, respond to, and recover from disasters. So I think that's my time. This is the best group I've worked with all night, so thank you for that. You guys are amazing. So thank you.
All right, so before you run away, has everyone had dinner yet? Don't worry, I won't hold you up too long. So we have a few parting gifts for you. Everyone should have one of these sheets. And we want to just kind of give you some information to kind of help you set a goal for yourself. Scott was talking about, community resiliency. And that's what we're really trying to build upon today. And that's what we've kind of been our campaign for many years now, in part thanks to our wonderful Emergency Preparedness Commission and the many commissioners who have participated over the years. And there's a lot of community groups out there, particularly in some of our HOAs. Del Webb is a phenomenal example of a community that has a emergency preparedness committee. And Mitch has been a rising champion of that cause. And so, look into your own community. Is there an emergency preparedness committee that you can participate in? And maybe you can champion the cause for one, get one started. Consider participating in the Rancho Mirage disaster radio system. We talked about getting radios out there. This is a system we've had around for, I think, 12, 14 years now, where it's a way for the community to talk to the city during a disaster, so we can help establish those relationships and get resources and information out to everyone. Sign up for CERT, Community Emergency Response Team. Who's all gone through CERT before? It was a great class, right? Charles Essling, Tom Aldridge, the great guys. They put on a phenomenal class. Tom fell through a roof about 6 months ago, but he's fine. He's a firefighter. They're resilient. Sign up for our CERT. Go on our website. There's several useful apps on the bottom of that document we gave you. The Watch Duty app. Anyone watch the wildfires? You can watch them in real time on the app, Watch Duty. You go on the website. Great app. You can get real-time information. The MyShake app, depending on where the earthquake is at, you can get a few seconds of notification on your phone for about an earthquake. And then download the American Red Cross First Aid app. You never know when you're going to need to use some first aid, and it's not a skill that most of us practice every day. So having that information in your phone, readily accessible, can make a huge difference in a pinch. So with that, I would just like to thank you, Scott, for coming here today, sharing with us this wonderful knowledge of yours. I don't think we always think in this mindset, and so again, Scott, thank you for being here today. We really appreciate it. And that's it for me. Thank you very much. All right.